So really excited to welcome Steve Portigal today. Steve is an experienced user researcher based out of San Francisco, principal of Portigal Consulting, author also of 2 books. Of course, the one that I mentioned and the other one, the classic Interviewing Users, How to Uncover Compelling Insights. Steve also has his own podcast that I strongly recommend all of you to check out, the host of Dollars to Donuts podcast, and love the name. So today, Steve is talking all about stop solving problems and reviewing several different mindsets for creating products and services while considering their benefits and risks and challenges, so you can go beyond a fixing mentality. Let's welcome Steve. Yay. Welcome, Steve.
Yay. Good morning. All right. I think we can see a screen, so let's jump into it. Thanks very much, everybody. And yes, this is called Stop Solving Problems. And so, what I want to do in the time that I have with you today is just look at a number of different approaches that I've seen around how orgs are going about creating products and services. And it's not meant to be a complete look at every possible mindset or every possible approach, but a few key ones. And I think one thing to keep in mind is there's many paths to success, but there are many more paths to failure. So you're going to hear about my preferences, but even if you don't agree with what my preferences are, I hope this is a way that you can be reflective about the way you go about things and consider just the risks in any different approach that you and the rest of your organization might be taking. So the first approach I want to look at is extend. So extend is the idea that some new product, it comes from a framework that's established by an existing product, like maybe the hot breakthrough product of the moment. So, Shazam is something that came out in 2008, unbelievably, but it's this kind of touch point for innovation, or maybe I want to put innovation in quotes. And maybe you've been in a brainstorm when someone says, what if we did Shazam, but it was for whatever it is that you're working on? And Uber, of course, represents kind of the even most ridiculous form of this. This is from a website, a business model generator, sarcastically, this parody. And it reminds us that this kind of thinking is very shallow, right? This notion that you can combine any sort of words you want with Uber, and then automatically that becomes a good idea, an idea that's worth money. But of course, this just takes a trend and it stands in for thinking. It's lazy thinking. So if you are extending an idea, look carefully at whether or not you think your idea is actually a good one versus something that just is easy to say the words for. Uber for wigs, we can say that. Is that a good idea? I don't know. And just as a note of how pervasive this form of thinking is, here's corporate PR for Ship Hero. They talk about their own product this way. Like they don't even have a better way to articulate what it is they do without sort of extending the metaphor of an existing product. I think this is disappointing to see. Another way that we fool ourselves with is creating these supposed radical reinventions that are in fact the same thing we've always had. We've always had this thing for a long time here, but here's an aesthetic that's rather cutting edge, depending on your taste, or cutting edge in the past. There's this, extensive branding makeover and this ridiculously aspirational story, a new kind of photography studio where you're the photographer. But this is a product that already exists, right? This looks like a pattern of disruption. It's the aesthetic of this disruption. But in fact, there's very little that's new here, right? We already have these. We've had them for a long time. Another kind of extension here, even if you're not literally replicating ideas from Black Mirror, you can see that as a philosophy. And sometimes, like with this example here, it makes me splutter with rage. It seems so benign. We're kind of tuned into this as being an approach, but this is actually a real product. This is a dispenser that it was appearing. I don't know where it is now, but I saw this in New York City. And so you can go up to it and get tap water. But if you want to get cold water that has been filtered, so better experience, better taste, better quality, better health, better safety, you have to use their app. So now there are two classes of people, and one class of person who can't access their mobile device, maybe because of income. They don't have any data left in their monthly plan. They're from a different country. They have a disability that impacts their usage of their mobile device. They can't get filtered cold water, right? Water is life, and requiring this app, submitting to advertising, and we don't know what else to get access to better water, that actually says terrible things about society and how we see ourselves. This is the type of thinking that makes the world worse, not better. But people, the makers of things like this, willingly fool themselves that these are good things that they're doing. All right, so now another example here is invent. And when I say invent, I'm talking about focusing on the product, focusing on the solution, focusing on the technology. Kind of the poster child for this, I think, someone who's successful is James Dyson. He created the Dyson vacuum and many other products. And he's really famous for his origin story of how he relentlessly focused on the solution. And you can find corporate literature that talks about 5,127 prototypes for the vacuum that he built over 5 years. So here's Dyson. He's focusing on the solution, and he's a genius, and he gets it right. So it can work out well if those conditions are met, right? Dyson is a success. Here's the Segway. The genius behind the Segway is Dean Kamen. And if you remember, kind of just before this came out, it was hyped as this technology that was going to change everything. But now look at it. It's used by police at the mall or the airport. It's used for tourists to go on tours. It is this brilliant piece of hardware in terms of what it does performance-wise, but the people at Segway fail to understand how people feel about how this thing makes them look, or anything about how people move between places during their day. So Segway is not a success. Here's a classic invention. Look at this thing. It's all solution. This is a way to open a door without touching it. But look at the physical manifestation. It's brutal materials. It's exposed screw heads and stainless steel. It's just so in love with its own solutionness. And yet the only way to make it usable for someone is to have a separate sign that goes with this device that explains not only what its purpose is, sanitary door opener, like why you should use it, but it needs an illustration of how you should do it, of how to actually open a door. And if you think about this gesture, it's something that's very awkward ergonomically and uncomfortable. So you, the user, you have to make your concessions to it. It's the solution and you're just the poor user. And taken to its extreme, this is kind of what invent gets you. All right, so let's talk about the problem. The work that we do is focused on fixing something, on solving a problem. So here, today we see designers and disruptors of all stripes getting seduced by wicked problems: income inequality, climate change, securing democracy. And of course, these are important, and it's exciting to see people working on them. And certainly if we do nothing, then nothing will ever change. But there's always going to be a lot of necessary work to do that is more about ensuring that simple problems get solved. And look at this. This is from an actual site. Someone coded and launched this. It's an online e-commerce site that actually exists. This is from last year. So there's, I think, a certain amount of hubris in the way the design industry speaks. That big picture systemic problems, those are the real job now for designers. When the things that designers as an industry set out to do, what user experience was always been about, to make things easier to use, is nowhere near resolved. And I will say, thinking very much about the current time, I've been extremely impressed with the way the designers and others have organized to respond to the pandemic and the healthcare and employment crises that are being caused. And now we're seeing a lot of communal focus on finding solvable problems and working those problems. And that is refreshing to see. It doesn't change, I think, this larger context of, the wicked problem being the one to focus on. But, given a crisis, I'm pleased with where the response has been. So one limitation of just focusing on a problem is that we see a lot of aiming at the problem after it's occurred instead of before. You see this sort of manifesting with signage. It's usually shifting the problem onto someone else. Sometimes the signage is willfully naive or given up on the real problem. So here's this box in my local medical office. It's a squat white bin with a wide black opening near the top that looks like a trash bin. There are 3 signs telling you what the box is for. dropping off your sleep study equipment, and 2 signs that tell you what it's not for. It's not for garbage. But the net effect is chaotic. There's no empathy here. Each message acts as if it's the only message. And there's no awareness of these other messages. And still, look at it, it looks like a garbage bin. That message is loud and clear, and no amount of signage is going to get around that. But the staff who have to go through every day and pick out the garbage, they have no control over the bin's design. And so they're left with the tool at their disposal, right? Their default tool, signage. Oh, here's another hospital. I saw this. So they did a better job here at designing for the behavior they wanted and to limit the behavior they didn't want. Although I got like a regular sticky printed badge, those ones that they have a really kind of crappy picture of your face on it, and it's kind of like a hello, my name is security badge. And when I was leaving, I didn't know what a Care Connect badge was. I just had a badge, and I thought maybe I was supposed to throw my badge in there, but a security guard had to stop me, and what I had actually was trashed. I shouldn't have put in there. Here's a dehumidifier. I am not a trash can. Do not force your garbage in me. Maybe the hope is that by anthropomorphizing, they can induce empathy and eliminate garbage forcing. Here's a cute little car parked in a commercial area. Oh, but wait, this is not a mailbox. Maybe in this case, there's less incentive for the Jollibee staff to try to resolve this because, hey, money is money. I'm gonna look at this one here. It's a beautiful sign. Some, official sign departments designed and, painted and, put up this very proper sign here. But look at the problem that they are talking about. There are trucks, this is in Massachusetts, so maybe there's a cultural thing here. Trucks will jump the curb. Well, maybe that's the problem to solve as opposed to just warning people, beautifully designed this. So, again, we're fixing the problem, but we're aiming in the wrong direction here. Yeah, I posted this photo the other day on Twitter. It's a crazy street sign in San Francisco. And here's the response that one person had. When you have to design a solution to a decision you have no control over. And that's an interesting point, right? To have empathy for designers who are handed a ridiculous situation and have to find a way to address it. But I think this lets designers off the hook a little bit too easy. I mean, look at it again here. This is not a designer doing anything effective to wrestle with complexity not of their choosing, right? This is a poor visualization of messy requirements. So I appreciate the reflex to consider the plight of the designer, but I don't think that's the overall narrative here. The selfie stick. I think this is a design failure. A critical usage of the product is the selfie, and the product as designed barely supports that. It's so important, but you need to have super long arms or a stick, an external aftermarket product to effectively compose a picture. So why doesn't the lens allow for this? And we get these solutions when the original design fails. And I think you can say this is a generational issue, maybe, but some people have figured out how to work around it, some people less so. So when we focus so specifically on fixing things, when we're obsessed with the problem, then the only user research we do is to test, whether or not the thing we have made has solved the problem. And so sometimes user research is seen as the same thing as usability tests. And of course, that isn't true. Usability testing has value, of course, but it's most closely tied to a view of the problem, not a richer consideration of the people that we're trying to empower. In this lovely article, Mark Reddick, he not only tackles the limitations of problem-first thinking, but he digs into the reframe that he kind of hints at here, that we can look at the situation itself to find the seeds of better possibilities. And Mark, as always, I think, does it so well here, has humility and a respect and a curiosity. And I think that's a wonderful challenge to the fixing mindset. All right, so here I'm talking with Discover about starting with people, looking to understand people, and in doing so, new things to make, new products, new services, new innovations can be revealed. And there's a really shallow version of this, I think, that we have, which is observe people. A few years ago, a design award was given out for a snow shovel. And the whole story that merited this design award was that the designers, the producers of the shovel, went out and did research. And the research they did was observe people shoveling snow. And their takeaway was, hey, there's more women than they thought there would be. So they changed the ergonomics of the shovel design to suit women. Of course, this is good, right? This is a benefit, but it's still a really shallow form of research. They're just observing what people do. They don't have any access to why, their motivations, their emotions, anything more complex. It was always going to be a shovel. It's still a shovel. The thing that gives these stories the sheen of innovation is that they actually took the step to go observe people, to challenge basic assumptions about their customers, like gender, for example. So what I'm advocating for here is starting with people, understanding their lives, their context, their values, what brings them meaning, what emotions they have. This isn't just the warm and fuzzy stuff that we might dismiss. It absolutely includes what people do, how they do it, why they're doing it that way, and what other ways they've tried. A number of years ago, when our banking client was going through a merger, it was turning things upside down in that organization. So they wondered, what's going on for customers? How's the merger affecting them? And of course, customers we talked with, they had a completely different perspective. And the big part of the work I do is letting people present themselves most broadly to us. And that means we're listening deeply. We're not checking off a few questions. We're learning what we don't even know we need to talk about. So hearing from bank customers about what's going on in their lives, challenges with health, school, business, work, family, home, you name it. We didn't ask them, tell us about the merger. We asked them, tell us about what's going on with you. And then we focused on the topics we needed to understand better. Another example, we worked with a big telecommunications company that wanted to understand the activities and the products and the companies that people love, right? They're not loved. They wanted to understand what that looked like. So we looked at environments that people went to because of their emotional relationship. Here's Rainbow Grocery in San Francisco. We looked at what people were doing, looked at what was in the environment. We found people who were deeply involved in different activities. We found a person who loved pugs. Another one had a lifelong relationship with Star Wars. Another one was committed to travel. Another was a coffee fanatic. And we met with them and we interviewed them about these passions, but also about their interactions with businesses. And we had them compare and contrast. We identified 8 factors that helped create emotional bonds. And we helped the client that we were working with look at what would that mean for their business to try to act on each of those 8 factors. So our objective was to help the whole company think differently about how they engage with their customers and indeed change their culture in response. Here's a close-up of a light pole outside the National Gallery in Ottawa, where people for years and years have been sticking their admission tickets into this messy collaborative collage. It's this gorgeous and ugly bit of urban art, and it's made right after consuming art in a more traditional way. And I include this as a reminder of another aspect of what we do. We pay attention to emerging behaviors. In other words, what are people trying to do? What are they doing on their own, outside of a system or a service, how they self-organize? We look to see how they're using something in a way that is different than how the designer intended. I'm not necessarily talking here about how they overcame the limitations or failures in the design, but how a design can serve as an opening to a new kind of experience. And so these are clues to pay attention to. They reveal needs, desires, and opportunities. So to do this, it means we go to people's homes, their offices, we go to where they are, we go to their context. We ask what they do. We ask them to show us what they do and how they do it. We get stories and long answers where we don't always know what the point is. We want to have them explain everything about their world to us. People may not have a ready answer as to why they do something, but we have to listen for why. We have to ask follow-up questions and probing and inferring to try to understand for ourselves just why something is happening that way. And a caution, one reason that people don't talk to customers is that they delude themselves into thinking that customers are just like them, right? Because we all, maybe in different times, we all take taxis, but we all buy music online. We all share photos. We all order food to be delivered. But you do this from a very different perspective. Your customers have less disposable income than you. They're less willing to try new solutions. They're less technically capable. They have different motivations, and they're just different than you for reasons you can't even begin to guess at. People are very complicated and interesting, and you owe it to yourself to challenge your assumptions and see what possibilities that opens up for you. And I want you to notice my stories don't end up with, and they made such and such a product, and it was great, end up making $1 billion. Those stories are rare if they exist at all. I look at this as a process. This is something that's very hard. My role is to help organizations really think about their opportunities in a fresh way, to be able to deliberately and carefully choose how and where they want to make a difference in the world, in a way that harnesses interesting aspects about people and about the company and the company's aspirations and capabilities. You may see this as riskier. I actually see it as a way of reducing risk, although the path can be unclear. And my encouragement, my advice is to try to step away from a problem-solving mindset, instead discovering opportunities that are rooted in people. But we're in a pandemic, Steve. We can't do this right now. How do we do research right now? This is the point where you might expect me to say the top 4 tips for doing remote research effectively. I mean, we're drowning in these articles right now. We've had them before. There's even more of them now. And I think there's a cognitive bias at play here, the presumptive fallacy that, because you can't do in-person research right now, you also can't go to concerts, restaurants, sporting events, movie theaters, or your friend's house. We are making adjustments, but we shouldn't be fooling ourselves into assuming that just because something is one way today, that it's going to be that way forever. So I invite you to think longer term than just the pandemic, as overwhelming as the pandemic is. All right, 2 examples to wrap up. I stayed at a hotel in Hawaii a few months ago. Here's the adult pool. And in this building are the bathrooms. So over the few days that we spent there, I started to see this pattern. If you wanted to use the bathroom, you'd go look, and if the door was ajar, it was free to use. Go in, close the door, lock it, do your thing, and then leave with the door ajar. So one day I went and the door was closed. So I waited, and I waited, and then I sat down, and then I went back and I waited. After a long time, I realized, oh, my assumed use model was not fully shared. And someone, either staff had a guest, they'd closed the door when they left. There was no one in there. I mean, the door has a lock, but that invites this very awkward interaction, right? To go up to the door and then try to open it, only to be foiled because the door won't open. Maybe forcing the person in the room into a bit of a startle. They might call out occupied or just a moment. It's awkward and it's unnecessary. And some bathrooms in this situation would have an indicator. So when the door is locked or unlocked, it slides a red or green color that you can see at a distance. Now you could put this whole thing back in that category of fixing a problem, but why I put it here in innovation is that it's rooted in an insight about people, about social cues. And this may not be true in the same way in different cultures, of course, but in this context, there's discomfort here around bathroom interactions with strangers. So really the point here is that changes that get made in products and experiences, they don't have to be dramatic, but when they address a fundamental, especially for the first time, it can be a big deal. All right, one last example that I'll leave you with. This is the interior of a tram in Amsterdam. If you enter by the back door of this tram, you basically see a customer service rep, right? It looks more like you're getting help at an airport versus the kind of people I'm used to seeing on public transit. He's wearing a suit, not some kind of watered down police uniform. He's at a desk, not behind plexiglass. You can speak with him without having to bend down and speak into a poor quality microphone or shout through holes in a plexiglass window. He makes eye contact and greets you when you come on board. He's there to help you use the transit system. A human is there to assist you while you're mid-journey. And you can imagine Amsterdam, like any other city of its size, has problems with people not paying or disorderly and violent passengers. But here the idea is to use a welcome to try to prevent that behavior rather than intimidation or enforcement. So as an American tourist in Europe, it's easy to see places where their default values are different than mine. And it's not hard to imagine there are trials that demonstrate that the welcome is more effective than the enforcement. But also, can you imagine trying to change the mindset of, let's say, a North American transit system? So the reframe here is so broad and it runs so counter to the entrenched assumptions. And that innovative mindset to rethink the entire problem and approach, and indeed your organization's role in response to these issues, that's probably the hardest, but I think the most important change to be driving for, and why I put this under the category of innovation. That's what I have time for today. The things that Preet mentioned off the top. Here's some links to things like my podcast, the 2 books that Preet mentioned. You can buy them at these links, but there's also lots more stuff that you can download. And then at the bottom there is how to find me if you want to connect. But that's it for now. Thanks very much. Let's see what we have time for, if anything at all.
Thank you, Steve. That was I have the applause plugged in. That was amazing. I loved the talk, and I'm sure many of us, at least I was, it was like you're smiling and almost like cackling at the examples because you're like, what? Like that street sign in San Francisco for the parking. I'm sure Nadia was really proud that you ended with an Amsterdam example.
Yeah, definitely. I was like, yeah, that was indeed a good example. And thanks for touching, Steve, on so many problems of product designers. I feel like pretty much everyone who is listening could relate to the things that you've been highlighting.
That was a really amazing talk. Thank you so much. Bye.